Hi, everyone. This is Stelios from the Data Scientist. We're here today with Joseph Yacura from the International Association for Data Quality, Governance, and Analytics. Hi, Joseph.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, so I'm in London. Joseph is in California, so it's morning over there. It's afternoon here. Joseph, why don't you introduce yourself? Why don't you tell us a few things about what does the International Association for Data Quality do?
Sure. Well, good afternoon or good morning to everyone. My name is Joe Yacura. I've spent most of my career in supply chain management in large companies such as IBM, Intercontinental Hotels Group, American Express, Bank of America, etc. Through my whole career, data has been critical to help manage the supply chain. And a few years ago, as tools became more prolific, the ability to capture more data at a lower cost and to analyze it became available, I really started to realize, as many others did, is that data is critical to making data-driven decision making. That kind of revelation, if you will, started to identify the weaknesses in the data that we currently have, whether it be the data quality, the relevance, the completeness, the accuracy. So about 2 years ago, I took out to start the International Association of Data Quality and Governance. It's a free association for anyone to join, and the target audiences are basically three groups of people. Undergraduate and graduate students who are about ready to enter the job field and may or may not have taken some courses on data analytics, but most of the university courses worldwide are quantitative in nature and don't necessarily tell you how to take that data and to do something with it. They teach you the math and the statistics behind analyzing, quantifying the data. The second group are working professionals that are actually in the supply chain space who now are called upon to use data but may be intimidated by it or just fearful of how to use it and not comfortable with the terminology, etc. And the third audience that we're trying to reach through the association are C-levels, chief executive officers, chief operating officers, chief data officers, chief purchasing officers, etc. The data terminology is used rather loosely at C-levels, and most senior executives really don't understand what these terms mean, nor do they understand the maturity or capabilities of their own organizations. So we would hope that we could reach that audience and help them understand that better so that they could give better direction and support to their employees who are working on data.
Great. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, especially around the last point that there's the C-level that really needs to get exposed to this kind of knowledge. As you know very well, I'm also very active in this field, educating decision makers on the best practices around data science. And that being said, you mentioned that you've been working with supply chains for many years, and I know that the association recently published an excellent document, a set of guidelines for supply chain data audit, right? And it's something I really wanted to talk to you. I think I really want to talk to you about this because I think it's an excellent document. I think it pretty much covers many of the things that need to be there, not only when auditing data for supply chains, but many other sectors as well, right? Because what many leaders do not understand is that the essence is usually the same, so the basics are the same across all industries, and you need to nail this down before you move on. And yeah, and you talk about how what are the differences between the sectors, because in most cases, like most leaders right now, at least this is what I've seen, is that they think that their problems are special, and there are some special problems out there, but in at least half of the cases, the problems are the same across many industries, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. When we started this, we said, okay, we're starting to talk and communicate amongst different industries around this issue of data. And the first thing we actually did before we did the data audit guidelines was we actually created a glossary of terms, because we found that people were using terminology with obviously different interpretations and different definitions. So they would leave a meeting thinking they were aligned, but of course they weren't. So what we did there is we did a search of the literature we found about 8 or 10 different independent sources of terminology and definitions. We combined all of those, and those are again are available on our website for free too. Everything is for free, and we gave credit to those authorization or the authority, excuse me, who created those terms. After we got the glossary, that kind of helped us Stylianos going, okay, what's the next step? And the next step is the data audit and guidelines, because most corporations today, whether they're mid-size or large, even some small companies, are spending a significant amount or significant percentage of their budgets around data tools. And the tools are outstanding. The technology is so advanced as it was just 3 or 4 years ago. Data scientists are writing great algorithms that are relevant and can help make decisions. But of course, the data going into these tools to train them or to be used in the applications is questionable at best. For the last 4 years, I've conducted a study, a global study, with a gentleman, Dr. Robert Hanfield out of North Carolina State, and we published that study. And the studies were funded by IBM. And what we're seeing, at least in the supply chain space, is a slow improvement. It's not a revolution. The issues are always a priority. All the senior executives and responders to our study say that data quality and governance is critical, absolutely necessary. They need to move their organizations to more data-driven decisions. But yet our study shows that they're spending actually year over year less money in training their people. So we said, in order to start, we need to create this data audit guidelines. And what it is, it's a brief document. It's only about 28 pages. And the first half of it is more about a little bit about data literacy, and it tells the reader a little bit about how to think about data, the terminology, etc. Doesn't go into a lot, but kind of sets it up for the second part, which is really some of the guidelines. And I think in my perception is the real value is there's about 58 questions
Yes, this
that
is
are
what
in
we're
there.
wanting to ask you about next. Yeah.
Right. So for those listening to this, don't get intimidated by 58 questions. They're very simple questions. And it's kind of like in the United States, there's a program called the Baldrige criteria. And what that is that's a set of questions. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a set of questions that if you can answer those questions or are thinking along a way to answer those questions, you probably have a pretty well-run organization. So that's what we did. We created this list of questions. And there's something as simple as, is there anyone in charge in your business function that's in charge of data? And in the supply chain function, I hate to say this, but most people look at us with a blank stare and say, no. So, it's starting at that fundamental level, these questions, and then they go a little bit more detailed. That you may need some other people to help you think it through, but it's a guide. It's not meant to be an absolute end all. Like you mentioned earlier, Stylianos, the things that we're addressing here are supply chain and beyond. Because when you look at data, the data issues around in supply chain are the same as the data issues in marketing or warranty services or customer services or whatever. It's the same methodology and thought process as how do you assure yourself that you're using good, qualified, relevant, accurate data. As we move more and more. And as you know, the supply chain is so broad. This is the challenge because we have everything from sourcing, identifying suppliers on the front end, to contract administration after an agreement has been written between parties to administer that agreement. We have warranty data that needs to be maintained. Then we go into the whole channel of product reliability. And then, if you go to the other far extreme, all the problems with logistics and all the data that's necessary to try to create this just-in-time world, which we, as a result of COVID, had found out that the supply chain is very, very fragile and fragmented, and regardless to almost every industry, and not just on the PPE stuff or COVID related, but we see now that semiconductors aren't available, so we can't ship cars, right? We can't find logistics. We can't find trucking companies or air freight companies. We find that shipping containers are being skewed to Asia and they're not being returned back. And there's so much data that has to be managed to try to get our supply chain, I want to say, really restarted,
Mm.
because it's broken because of COVID.
Yeah.
Again, it's not directly, but indirectly because of COVID. People can't go to work, things of that nature. And I had a simple situation here where I needed to get something for my home, and
Mhm.
the product I needed was simply two pieces of material, and someone's going to fabricate for us. It took them 6 weeks, to get two
Mhm.
pieces of material, two different types of material to make this for us. And I just talked to a contractor the other day, just trying to make it real. Uh, they were saying that here on the West Coast, if you build a new house, windows for a new house are anywhere from 12 to 16 months back ordered.
Mhm.
So data, you need to know where these products are. You need
Yeah.
to help them forecast better.
Yeah.
You need to, it enters every aspect of the supply chain. And that's what this data audit guidelines purpose is to give you a start. It's not the
Yeah.
end all. It was a much larger document. We decided to cut it back only because we didn't want to make it too intimidating. We will be coming out with a version 1.1 here at some point in the future. We've gotten a lot of good comments, a lot of good suggestions as to how we can expand it. But again, it was a question of intimidation. We didn't want to intimidate somebody just starting into this field. We wanted to give them a good basis, a good starting point, and they can build from there on their own.
Yeah, yeah, I see. And would you say that one of the challenges around using data in the supply chain is that data is very heterogeneous, right? You got all kinds of data sources, and also this data might be all over the place. You have a supply chain that might involve 5 different entities, and there's necessarily no visibility as to what's happening in 80% of this process, right?
Yeah, when you look at our study and you look at studies from Accenture or
Mm-hmm.
Cognizant or McKinsey, whoever did a study, Deloitte, whoever's doing them, you will find a consistent pattern that
Mm-hmm.
senior executives in most corporations do not trust their data, and
Yeah.
they're admitting it. So they have good data to make decisions. They don't trust it, so therefore they refer back to a gut reaction or what they've done in the past, which may not be the
Mm.
correct answer going forward. And one of the things that we'll be addressing going forward by the association is this whole area of governance. There aren't any guidelines around capturing, the storing in most corporations, the use of data. So in many cases, there's no validation of authentication. So there's no history of the data either.
Yeah.
So when people look at data, they could be looking at a summary of a summary that was put together 3 months ago to solve a different problem.
Yeah.
But in most cases, when senior executives don't have the time, they expect the data to be absolutely correct when they view it the first time. They usually don't ask 2 or 3 questions deep about the data. They just
Mm-hmm.
work from the data that's presented to them. And that often leads to sub-optimized or even incorrect business decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the organizations have to start to establish credibility in the data so that their end users and senior executives will support the decision that comes out of these tools that use the data.
Yeah.
And when you use the term governance, people's eyes glaze over. Mine used to too. I'm not any different. Oh man, more bureaucracy. Nothing's going to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
done, right?
yeah, yeah.
But there has to be a minimum level. I'm not talking about creating some huge thing, but it has to be a minimum level that when you look at some data, it's from a valid source, it's relevant, it's
Mm-hmm.
current, it's complete, it's accurate, it's trustworthy. And then you can use data-driven decision-making tools to help
Yes.
you move along. We're all learning today that with the Internet of Things, we have massive amounts of data, none of which we can humanly clean up,
Correct. Yeah.
organize, assess, and interpret. We can't do it. So we have to start putting more and more trust in autonomous decision making. It'll take
Mm-hmm.
us a while to get there. Some companies are more advanced than others. But again, it all starts with having trust in the data that's being used, whether through some automated autonomous tool or just human interpretation. And that's very important. And we've kind of lost that now
Yeah.
at the senior executive levels. And with the velocity of information, so much coming at such a high speed, and the world changing. Before, when I was in supply chain, when I started like 30 years ago in a supply chain space, if you had data that was a month old, that was more than sufficient in most cases
Mm.
to manage your supplier. Well,
Really?
in today's world, things change so quickly that not that you need instantaneous data like every second, but things can move week from week. And when
Yeah.
you have a one of the things in supply chain that in our study has surfaced, and this is kind of all directly related to to your question, companies know what they want for data, or should know what they want for data. Let's leave it that way. When they issue a request for quote, which is a formal requirement to a supplier to come back and give us a price, quantity, delivery for a product or service, almost zero corporations also have a data requirement that goes out with that RFQ. So they enter into an agreement with the supplier. Now they start asking for this data, and the supplier may or may not be able to provide it to them at either their frequency or in the format or at the level of detail that's required. So the supply chain functions need to get ahead of the curve and start to put their data requirements as part of their RFQ, and not wait till after the contracts are signed, you're into an agreement, and you decide what information I need to manage this relationship. It's kind of
Yes.
interesting that we haven't thought that way, but we haven't. And the supply chain role is changing dramatically. Before it was just cost, 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 cost. Now cost is not the primary driver. It's true value, total life cycle cost, it's availability, it's innovation and creativity that we can get from the supply chain. There's a lot of attributes that we need to get from suppliers, because as a single organization, whether we're providing a service or product, we can't own all the resources. It's impossible to own all the resources you need. So we are dependent upon these outside third parties to help us be successful.
And can I ask you, do you believe that blockchain has anything to add in the space of supply chain? Because we've seen IBM, for example, making some big moves in this space. And I think there's also now a decentralized project, a cryptocurrency. I can't recall the name. I was looking into this in the morning, trying to do the same.
Yeah, I think blockchain will have a dramatic impact on the supply chain. What I think is most people still don't understand what blockchain is, how it can be beneficial to them. One of the things that's happened over the years, and I'll just take a very small issue around supply chain, is counterfeit products. Many of these products that we buy are critical to either the defense of the country or to medical health, etc. And if you get a counterfeit component that isn't built to the right specification, that can be absolutely disastrous. I know the airlines are extremely concerned about buying spare parts for aircraft, especially aircraft as they get older. Because, if you have a bolt or something that's holding the engine onto the wing and it isn't the right material and it can't handle the stress, or the landing gear or anything like that, medical devices that may have electronic circuitry that have counterfeit components in them. And they're critical for, maintaining your life support, many in cases, right, as hospitals. There's all kinds of issues that blockchain, and that's just one little aspect of blockchain that could help in a supply chain, and that's in counterfeit parts. The other one is the legacy, as we know in the healthcare. Here every now and then we have outbreaks in, around the world, but here in California and in the US, you see we have outbreaks with food. It's been contaminated by E. coli or something. And they need to backtrace to the source and to find out where the other products that came from that farm were distributed to, so they can take them off the shelf. Well, without blockchain, and I believe it was Walmart or one of the large merchandising companies here in the United States did a showcase. I think it was with IBM. I'm pretty sure it was. And that would have taken them their traditional process 2 to 3 days to backtrack to find out where all this product was and try to get it recalled off the shelf and notify people not to consume
I think it was Walmart.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. And with blockchain, they did it in, like minutes or something, some incredible speed. So also the issue too is I see a future blockchain getting into as we create smart contracts. And what I mean by smart contracts is most corporations, large ones especially, because they have the resources, do a pretty good job of creating contracts and doing due diligence. And they write all kinds of good terms and conditions into a contract. They negotiate them. Usually they're difficult to negotiate. They get resolved. They get put in a contract. Reality is after that's signed, very few people even know about those terms and conditions. And the end user is just worried about getting his or her product or service on time at a given level of quality, at a given level of price. With blockchain, we can monitor the other terms that are not being addressed or honored as part of
Hmm.
that agreement. So there's, in contract administration, is huge because there's some studies out there that say that companies could lose between 5 and 10% because of faulty contract administration. They're not taking advantage of what the terms and conditions are to their benefit. Because again, most of the time these contracts are written, now it's electronic file. Before it was a paper file sat on somebody's desk and somebody's filing cabinet, and now it sits on someone's server or maybe even their laptop or a flash drive, wherever. And no one really understands what the terms and conditions are of that agreement,
Hmm.
other than price, delivery, and quality. And there's a lot more that go into contracts than just those three elements. So blockchain to me it's one of those technologies that I think is definitely, in my opinion, misunderstood,
Yeah.
uh, undervalued. I think it's going to be one of those things that someday there's going to be something that's going to trigger and it's going to become almost a de facto standard. But
Hmm.
until that happens, I don't know what that trigger is going to be. But there's huge implications, positive implications, blockchain within supply chain.
Hmm. Hmm. That's good to know. I mean, I basically share the same opinion in the thing that the fact that there are quite a few players moving in this space, it's because blockchain is one of the most concrete use cases. Sorry, supply chains is one of the most concrete use cases for blockchain.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not maybe as fancy as Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, but it's definitely something very, very useful. So
Yeah.
that being said, I want this before we conclude. I wanted to briefly touch upon the ISO 8000, the whole
Yep.
topic of ISO 8000 and the standardization of data quality.
Yep.
I know that you've also discussing this in the report, in the audit guidelines for supply chain. Would you like maybe to tell us a few words about the ISO 8000 and why you think it's important, not only for supply chains but in general?
Yeah. ISO 8000 is focused on data quality. And of course, that's what our association is focused on.
Mhm.
What it attempts to do is create a framework for suppliers for master data records, etc. Because as we know, as we exchange information and how we tag information, identify information, parts, part categories, etc. Um, it goes widely very quickly. So if we're buying
Mhm.
a component from a distributor, the distributor is probably buying it from a manufacturer who has a part number. A distributor puts his or her part number on it, and then we end up using that component in a sub-assembly that goes into our end product, and we put a different part number on it.
Mhm.
So pretty soon the traceability of that is almost impossible.
Mhm.
So I think what you're going to see is the use of blockchain supporting ISO 8000 so that we can start using the same terminology, description, identifiers throughout the whole flow of a product and or a service. There were standards that were identified before, like UN SPSC code. It was
Mhm.
funded by the United Nations. It was an attempt to start to categorize things.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to remember, I think it's like 7 digits, maybe 9 digits. And each digit narrowed down the classification. But even when you got to the end, it was still a broad classification. So you'd have
Yeah.
a series of numbers that would mean this is a computer, and then you could get down to some other series number. You could know that this was a laptop. That's as far as you
Mhm.
could get. You didn't know what the performance was of that laptop. So as we know, you can buy a laptop for a few $100s or a laptop for a couple $1,000s. It's a laptop, but it's not the same machine
Yeah.
based on capabilities and performance.
Mhm.
So what the ISO 8000 is doing is trying to help you narrow that down so you can take it to the finest level of granularity. ISO 8000 is not well known, which
Mhm.
is interesting. It's kind of viewed as, oh, here comes another regulatory kind of, if you will, probably a bad choice of terms, but here comes somebody else telling me how to classify things. I think just the other day, the United Arab Emirates as a country decided to standardize their around 8,000
Okay.
to
I didn't
start.
know
And
about this. Very interesting.
yeah, it's brand new news. It was like 2 or 3 days ago. Uh, NATO has used that because you have multiple countries buying similar parts, and they have different ways of identifying products. So it's a way to standardize it. I think the problem with the UNSPSC code, it was written by standards people and not necessarily, I don't think they engaged the supply chain community enough. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that by having them engaged, they would have done a better job, but
Yeah.
most supply chain professionals, chief procurement office, etc., are totally unaware of 8,000. So that's why we ISO 8,000, excuse me. So that's why we put it in the audit as an awareness. Uh, it's very deep. We just touch on it briefly, obviously, in this audit
Hmm.
guidelines. We touch on a lot of things, but it's just to make the readers of the audit and hopefully the people who are performing us aware that such a standard exists, and hopefully motivates them to go in and to start to look at it and how it could be applicable to their organization. Like Corning Glass, I know Corning Glass here in the U.S. has made a major commitment to ISO 8000, and there's others. And I don't mean to not mention, but that's not the purpose here. But it is
Hmm.
being adopted by certain industries, by certain countries, and by certain multinational organizations like NATO.
Yeah.
But it's a
Oh,
long
interesting.
process.
Interesting. So yeah, I think that uh, slowly maybe mindsets will shift. Like you're saying, it's a long process, but I think the more we speak about it, the more we engage with the community out there, the more
Absolutely.
the mindsets will change. Right. This is why this association exists as well. Right?
Yeah, the association exists as an educational association. We don't have a
Yeah.
product to sell.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to sell a service or software or anything like that. The mission is to help make people aware and educate. We want to be a source of valid, credible information that anyone can access to help their organization. When I say organization, because it doesn't have to be just commercial organization, it could be nonprofit organizations.
Hmm.
It could be educational institutions. It could be a symphony. It could be anybody. People use data in all different ways to make their organizations better and relevant and meet the needs of their customers, whether they're a health aid organization or whatever. So data is critical. It's very interesting that people are starting to recognize this.
Hmm.
If you go on our website, I have some links to some other organizations. A very interesting one that I found that actually has some excellent work is the library at Harvard Medical School, of all
Okay.
places. And they have webinars, and there's a link on our site that goes to it. And they have these webinars, and they address their purpose is to educate medical researchers on how to use data when
Mm,
they're doing their studies.
very
That's their
interesting.
purpose. And in these webinars, they maybe talk 5% of the time on related to the medical aspect of use
Hmm.
of data. The other 95% are incredible wealth of knowledge about data in general, data literacy, data governance, data quality, all these aspects of data that they address. And who would go to the Harvard Medical School library to find information about data, right? But it's there because they know how important it is for
Hmm.
their purpose, but the information they share is relevant to a much, much broader audience.
Hmm.
So I'd encourage you to check these things out too. SAS has some very interesting
Hmm.
online webinars, and they're also identified at the end of our website. So please feel free to join it. Please feel free to join the association. It's for free. Love comments, dialogue. We're all in this together. And again, the association's mission is to advance the education. And I really thank you, Stylianos, for an opportunity to talk to your audience about this.
Well, I think that's a very interesting topic, and thank you for being on this podcast. And before we go, what's the website of the organization? How can our audience find it?
Sure, it's unfortunately it's a convoluted name. The
It is
name
a
is the
bit.
international. Yeah, the
Yeah.
name is the. I'm guilty of that. It's the International Association of Data Quality, Governance, and Analytics, and it can be found at www.iadqga.com. And when you sign in, it asks you if you want to be a member. Again, it's free. We do not sell this list to anyone. You don't have to worry about getting emails or spam from anyone else. And it asks you can register either as a student and or as a working professional. And we're doing that because we're trying to do more things. We're actually probably going to be starting very soon, at least here in the US, and we'd love to do this worldwide, our university chapters of the association. And
Mhm.
so we have a few schools right now who are going to start that. Um, So again, we appreciate anyone visiting it. Hopefully the site is of value to you. Please join. Please share with your friends and coworkers and other people who may be interested in data. And we're always welcome to hearing comments and suggestions from anyone out there, what we can do better as an association to help you be more successful.
Thank you, Joseph. So this was, I think, a very, very interesting episode, and I also hope our audience found this very useful. Make sure to check out the website of the International Association for Data Quality, Governance, and Analytics. So while there are not that many people talking about these topics now, I personally believe that everyone will be talking about this in a few years, because as data science and AI become more common, more widespread, soon leaders will realize that it really starts with the data and data quality and many of those topics which might not be as recognized right now, but eventually there will be. And it's great that we have people like Joseph putting the word out there and making sure that everyone has access to this very valuable information. So thanks everyone for listening to this. And make sure to visit the datascientist.com for more content around AI, data science, and blockchain. Thank you, Joseph. And yeah, hope to see you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Have a
Thanks,
great
everyone.
day.
Bye bye.